The Heaven Sword and Dragon Saber. Author, Jin Yong. Chapter 1, Part B. Wuxia said, however, when the experts are here, and if we don't show them some special ability they will not be impressed. The Luohan Hall is there to welcome these guests with this special treatment. Guoxiang laughed and said, so you're just here for the fights. Wuxia smiled with a wry, normally Wulin persons, the disciples of the Luohan Hall can deal with them, I don't need to fight them personally. But today when I saw that Miss Guo's martial arts were out of the ordinary I decided to see for myself. Guoxiang smiled, you have a very high opinion of me. Wuxia said, look at me, we're digressing. To tell you the truth, we found this note in the Luohan Hall in the hands of the dragon subduing our hut. Guoxiang was surprised and asked, who put it there? Wuxia shook his head and said, we don't know. There are hundreds of Shaolin monks in the monastery, if someone sneaked in, someone must have noticed that. And there are 8 disciples standing guard in the Luohan Hall every day. Someone just found the note and quickly reported it to the abbot. Everyone found it strange and that's why I was called back so urgently. Guoxiang now understood what he was getting at and said, you think I'm in league with the 3 saints of Kunlun? I'm creating a diversion here while those 3 fellows enter the Luohan Hall and leave the note. Wuxia said, after meeting you I found it impossible you would do something like that. But it was very coincidental that with your appearance a note is left behind in the Luohan Hall. That's why the abbot and my martial arts brother Wuxiang wrongly suspected you were involved in this. Guoxiang said, I don't know them, what are you afraid of? 10 days later if they dare to come, just accept the challenge. Wuxia said, afraid, of course we're not afraid. I'm reassured now that they are not your friends. Guoxiang knew Wuxia's intentions were good, he was afraid that the 3 saints were friends of hers and was afraid that in a fight they might damage their friendship. She said, if they come here and courteously want to examine martial arts with you that's not a problem. Otherwise, just teach them a lesson. Also the tone of the note was very arrogant, see all Shaolin skills. Do they really want to see the 72 skills of Shaolin? Suddenly she thought of something and said, couldn't it be that there is a traitor amongst you and secretly put the note there? Wuxia said, we thought of this too, but that was impossible. Because the Arhat statue's hand was almost 10 meters tall. If someone was to jump up there, his art of levitation should be superb. If there was a traitor he wouldn't have such good martial arts. Guoxiang was very puzzled by this entire incident and was very interested to know the outcome of this duel. But she knew she would miss out on this fight because Shaolin didn't allow women to enter. Wuxia saw she was pensive and thought that she was thinking of a plan to help them and said, Shaolin has overcome many obstacles in these 1,000 years and is still standing. If the 3 saints of Kunlun really want to pick a fight, we will try our best to battle them. Miss Guo, in less than a month, you'll hear whether these 3 saints of Kunlun have defeated Shaolin or not. At this point, he looked very energetic and brave. Guoxiang smiled and said, don't forget about your cultivation. In less than a month I will await your good news. She mounted her mule again and smiled to Wuxia. And then she rode off thinking of a plan not to miss out on this battle. After thinking for a while, perhaps these 3 saints of Kunlun are just some ordinary Wulin people. And will be easily defeated by the Shaolin monks, if they only had half the skills of my mother, father, grandfather or brother Yang, this fight will be very interesting. When she thought of Yang Guo she became melancholic again. These 3 years of searching were in vain. The tomb on Mount Zhongnan was empty, no news in the Valley of No Love, the Fengling Ferry was deserted too. She thought, what do I do when I find him? It will only increase my feelings for him and bring extra frustration. He left for a faraway place, that was also good for me. Although I know everything I do is in vain, it can't stop me from thinking about him and trying to find him. She rode her mule and wandered a bit on Mount Shaoxi and was feeling melancholic. She heard music sounds, she was surprised to hear someone playing the zither. She learnt the arts of zither, chess, literature and painting from her mother. Although she learned only the basics, she is intelligent enough to give her own unique perspective on matters. Frequently, she discussed these arts with her mother. She tied her mule to a tree and walked towards the music. She heard the music was mixed by the singing of birds and it seemed that the birds were singing along. Guoxiang thought, according to mother there is a song called Empty Mountain and Songs of Birds. But this song was lost for many ages, is it possible this is that song? The music became more and more interesting. Guoxiong was surprised and thought, this man can lure birds with his music, this song must be 100 birds admiring the phoenix. And thought if her grandfather was here, both of them could play this song together. Because Huang Yaoxi's flute was unequaled at this time. The music became softer and the birds flew away and suddenly the music stopped. The man sighed and said he couldn't find a soulmate and drew his sword and started carving on the ground. Guoxiong thought, this man is both well versed in artistic fields and martial arts, let's see how his swordsmanship is. She saw that this man was drawing a chessboard with his sword and started playing chess, go, with himself. Guoxiong thought, this man is lonely too and can't find a soulmate either. So he's playing chess with himself. After a while she saw that the man trapped himself in the western side of the chessboard and leaving the central open. Guoxiong couldn't help herself and spoke, why do you take the western borders? While the central plains are open. The man saw what he did and took the central plains causing a draw. The man laughed and said, good, good, and continued to play and realized that someone was present. He tossed his sword away and said, thank you for your help. May I ask who helped me? Guoxiong saw that he had a long face and dark eyes and was quite skinny. He was about 30 years old. She walked towards him and smiled, I was very much enchanted by your music, sir. And when I saw that you're losing to yourself I couldn't help pointing out. Please forgive me for my bluntness. The man was surprised to see a young girl and when he heard her talking about his music, he was very happy and said, Miss, is a musician too? Would you please play a piece for me? Guoxiong smiled and said, my mother taught me some basics, compared to your divine music I'm very bad. But since I heard your song it's only natural that I return a song back. But you mustn't laugh. The man said, I wouldn't dare. And handed the zither to Guoxiong. Guoxiong saw that this zither was an antique. She started to play the zither and her playing was not very spectacular but the man was very happy and surprised. The song was about a hermit and he lived alone on a mountain and felt lonely. Because he didn't have a soulmate he looked sickly but his aspirations will always be very high. The man heard his feelings in the music of Guoxiong and was very grateful and when the music stopped, he just stared into the blank. Guoxiong gently put the zither on the ground and turned around and left again. Reciting the poem that matched this song. A gentleman is exploring the mountainside close to a stream, all alone although he is forlorn, although he is unaware but he is wise, and will never change and this piece is the gentleman's song. The day is so short, 100 years is so long the earth is so wide, 100 incarnations approaches the Tao and angel releases the rains, 1/2 is as wide as snow. The creator meets the jade lady laughing, I wish for the dragon's embrace turning towards Wutang, to buy good wine at Bakbao inviting the dragon to riches which I scorn, that throughout the year beautify only the being. Guoxiong roamed the realm for 3 years now, and encountered many strange incidents. So she forgot all about the man who played the zither and chess. Another 2 days, the 3 saints of Kunlun will challenge Shaolin. She was thinking of a way to sneak in and watch but couldn't think of anything. She thought, my mother can think of 18 plans in a blink of an eye. I'm just too stupid and I can't even think of one plan. Never mind, I'll just go to Shaolin and perhaps they are too busy fighting of the intruders that they forget to stop me from entering. She ate some rations for the journey and proceeded to Shaolin. After riding for some time, she saw 3 horses riding towards her. And in short while they passed her and were headed towards Shaolin. The riders were all men in their 50s and wore green robes and weapons hung to the saddles. Guoxiong thought, these 3 men are martial artists and they are carrying weapons. They must be the 3 saints of Kunlun. If I don't hurry up, I'll miss out on a good fight. She gave her mule a clap and he quickly pursued them. The 3 riders whipped their horses to increase speed. One of the old men turned back and gave a strange look. Guoxiong's mule gave chase for a short distance. The 3 horses were out of sight. The mule looked exhausted. Guoxiong scolded, lazy animal. Normally you never listen to me and keep running about. When I need you to run, you can't keep up. She pulled the mule to a small stone pavilion and gave the mule to rest. After a while the 3 riders came back. Guoxiong was surprised and thought, could it be that they are really that useless and were defeated in one blow? The 3 riders dismounted, Guo Xiong looked at them and saw that one of them had a cinnabar-colored face. The other had a really red face and looked very friendly. The third one was very tall and skinny and looked very pale, but in his paleness there was a touch of green. These three old men looked very normal except for their strange skin complexion. She was very fascinated and asked, "Could I ask you whether you went to the Shaolin Monastery or not? Why did you return when you just went up there?" The pale-looking man gave her a stern look, like scolding her for asking questions. The red-faced man smiled and said, "How did you know we are headed for the monastery?" Guo Xiong said, "If you go up there, you'll go to the Shaolin Monastery." The red-faced man nodded and said, "That's true, and miss, where are you going?" Guo Xiong said, "You're going to Shaolin, and I'm going too." The pale-faced man said, "Shaolin doesn't allow women to enter and carrying weapons is also forbidden." He sounded very arrogant, and because of his height he looked over Guo Xiong's head, ignoring her completely. Guo Xiong was annoyed and said, "Well, you're carrying weapons too. Or aren't those weapons?" The pale-faced man coldly said, "How can you compare yourself with us?" Guo Xiong scoffed, "What about the three of you? Are the three saints of Kunlun fighting with the old monks of Shaolin yet? Who won and who lost?" The three old men's faces changed. The red-faced man asked, "Little miss, how do you know about this incident with the three saints of Kunlun?" Guo Xiong said, "Of course I know." The pale-faced man walked up and sternly said, "What's your name? Whose disciple are you? And what is your business here at Shaolin?" Guo Xiong raised her pretty face and said, "Never you mind." The pale-faced man was hot-tempered and raised his hand to slap her. But he realized that if he did that, he will be bullying a young girl. He swiftly advanced towards Guo Xiong and seized her sword. Guo Xiong was taken off guard. This never happened before in her life. To be frank, with her martial arts and experience she was not fit to roam the realm on her own. But everyone respected Guo Jing and Huang Rong and knew she was their daughter, and Yang Guo spread the word of her 16th birthday and all the unorthodox Wulin person knew her. Even if they dared not to give Guo Jing and Huang Rong face, they would surely respect Yang Guo. Furthermore, she was very pretty and straightforward. She treated everyone equally no matter what social status they had. Although the realm of martial arts was a dangerous place, she always came out fine and without any harm. She never suffered such humiliation in her life and knew she couldn't get her sword back. Because she was not their match yet. But to give up like this was very difficult to accept. The pale-faced man held the sword between his index finger and middle finger and coldly said, "I'll keep this sword for a while. Seeing you have the audacity to be disrespectful towards me, it's clearly that your parents and teachers didn't teach you any manners. If you want them to come and reclaim the sword, and I will tell them what happened and advise to pay more attention to you." Guo Xiong was furious when she heard this. According to this man she was a wild girl with no manners, and thought, "Fine. Not only did you scold me, you also scolded my parents, grandfather. Do you really think you have invincible abilities and you can be that arrogant?" She held her temper and said, "What's your name?" The pale-faced man grunted and said, "Let me teach you. You should say, 'Sirs, may I be so bold to ask you what your names are?'" Guo Xiong angrily said, "No, I will say it however I want. If you don't want to tell me, fine. It's not that I'm desperate to know. This sword isn't worth much, and you are bullying a young girl by stealing their possessions. I don't want it anymore." She turned around and walked out the pavilion. Suddenly the red-faced man blocked Guo Xiong and smiled, "Young girls shouldn't be that hot-tempered. When you get married you can't throw tantrums like that anymore. Let me tell you, we are three martial arts brothers, and we just arrived in China a few days. We're from the western borders of China." Guo Xiong pouted, "I know that too. In China we don't recognize the three of you." The three men looked at each other and the red-faced man asked, "May I ask, miss, who your teacher is?" Guo Xiong didn't want to reveal the names of her parents at Shaolin originally. But now she was angry and told them, "My father's name is Guo Jing. And my mother is called Huang Rong. I don't have a teacher, I learnt a bit of martial arts from my parents." The three old men looked at each other and the pale-faced man softly said, "Guo Jing? Huang Rong? Of which school do they belong? Whose disciples are they?" Guo Xiong was infuriated, because her parents were respected throughout the realm. Even ordinary people know them, let alone Wulin persons. The famous great hero Guo Jing was respected for guarding the city of Xiangyang for many years. But judging from their expressions, they are not pretending to be ignorant. She realized, these three saints of Kunlun live on the western borders and rarely come to China. Otherwise, with their martial arts father and mother were bound to mention them to me. If they truly don't know my parents, then it's not strange. It's very likely that they just study martial arts at Mount Kunlun and forget all other matters. When she realized this, her anger disappeared. She is not a girl to throw tantrums and said, "My name is Guo Xiang." "Fine, I have told you everything you wanted to know. Sirs, may I be so bold to ask you what your names are?" The red-faced man smiled. "That's a good girl, now you show respect to seniors." He pointed to the yellow-faced man and said, "That's our eldest martial arts brother, his name Pan Tiangang. I'm the second martial arts brother and my name is Fang Tianlao. This is my third martial arts brother and his name is Wei Tian Wang. The three of us all belong to the Tian character generation." Guo Xiong nodded and remembered their names and asked, "Are you going to the Shaolin monastery or not? Have you battled the monks there? And who is better?" Wei Tian Wang sternly asked her, "How did you know we're going to compete with the Shaolin monks? Hardly anyone knows this, and when did you know this? Tell us now." He walked towards Guo Xiong, made a fist and stared at Guo Xiong very viciously. Guo Xiong thought, "Do you really think you can intimidate me? Originally I wanted to tell you, but now I won't talk." She gave him an indifferent eye and said coldly, "Your name is good, why don't you change it into Tian, born viciously?" Wei Tian Wang angrily shouted, "What?" Guo Xiong said, "I never met a more vicious man like you. You grabbed my weapon and you're still this fierce. Are you the deity of ferociousness in reincarnation?" Wei Tian Wang made a few strange noises like an animal and his chest swelled up and it looked like his hair and eyebrows raised too. Fang Tianlao said, "Third brother, don't get upset." And he pulled Guo Xiong back and he stood between the two of them. Guo Xiong saw Wei Tian Wang and knew if he attacked, she would not be able to withstand it and was beginning to get a bit scared. Wei Tian Wang pulled out the short sword of Guo Xiong and used 2 fingers to hold it and used his internal strength to break it into 2 halves. He returned the broken half back into the scabbard and said, "Who wants your unworthy sword?" Guo Xiong saw the powerful energy of his fingers and looked in awe. Wei Tian Wang saw her expression and was very pleased and laughed heartily. This laughter was ear-piercing and shook the roof tiles of the pavilion. Suddenly the roof cracked open and something fell down. Everyone was surprised at this and even Wei Tian Wang was even more surprised. He used his internal strength to make a laughing sound to tremble the tiles. But actually there was no tone of pleasure in his laughter. When he saw the roof cracking open he thought that without his own knowledge he reached a higher level in his cultivation of internal energy. When he looked at the thing that dropped down he was shocked to see a man in a white robe holding a zither. He was just lying there, closing his eyes. Guo Xiong was pleased to see him and said, "You're here too." This man was the man she met earlier. The man jumped up when he heard Guo Xiong talking to him and said, "Miss, I was looking for you. I didn't know you were here." Guo Xiong said, "Why are you looking for me?" That man said, "I forgot to ask you something, namely, Miss, may I ask what your name is?" Guo Xiong said, "How very formal, I can't stand that genteel and mournful way of talking." That man was stunned for a moment and laughed, "You're right, you're right. Those that cling on to mere conventionalities and put on airs have no real abilities. Those men are only fit to fool ignorant peasants." After saying that he looked at Wei Tian Wang and scoffed. Guo Xiong was very happy and thought this man was helping her. Wei Tian Wang stared at him and his face became even more white and coldly asked, "May I know your name, sir?" That man ignored him and asked, "Miss, what's your name?" Guo Xiong said, "My name is Guo Xiong." That man clapped his hand and said, "Forgive me for not recognizing you, you're the famous Miss Guo. Your father is the great hero Master Guo Jing and your mother is the famous heroine Master Huang Rong. With the exception for ignorant peasants and idiots, everyone in the realm of martial arts knows them. The two of them are well versed in both literary and martial arts, and are well versed in saber, swords, spears, halberds. Also renowned for their palm, fist techniques, internal energy, zither, chess, calligraphy, art, composing poems and songs. But there are clearly some foolish people who have never heard of them before." Guo Xiong was quite amused and thought, "You were listening at our conversation on the roof. It seems that you don't know my parents are." And my father being well versed in literary fields is even more hilarious." She laughed and said, "Well, what's your name?" The man answered, "My name is Hitsu Dao." Guoxiong smiled and said, "Hitsu Dao. Hitsu Dao's I, not worth mentioning? A very modest name." Hitsu Dao said, "Compared to Tian, heaven, something orty, earth, something these arrogant bragging, overweening ignoramuses, my name isn't that appalling." Hitsu Dao keeps mocking the three of them. They could keep their tempers under control because they knew this man wasn't an ordinary man. But his remarks were getting even more insulting, and Wei Tianwang was the first to attack and raised his palm to strike Hitsu Dao. Hitsu Dao ducked his head and passed under Wei's arms. Wei Tianwang felt a numbness in his left hand and saw that he seized the sword out of his hand. When Wei Tianwang seized the sword, he was so swift that no one could see his movements, but Hitsu Dao did in a very floating and light manner. Wei Tianwang was shocked, and he used his hands as claws to try to get the sword back. He aimed for his shoulder. He avoided that claw. Pan Tiangang and Fang Tianlao leapt out of the pavilion. Wei Tianwang attacked with both hands, left hand with a fist, right hand palm stances causing a whooshing sound. Hitsu Dao avoided Wei's 7-8 stances. Wei couldn't even touch his clothes. With one hand holding the sword, he could still avoid the attacker's violent attacks. With a small movement, Wei Tianwang's attacks were always in vain. Guoxiong herself was not a real martial arts expert due to her young age. However, her friends and relatives are all top martial arts experts of this time, so her insight is very profound on martial arts. When she saw that Hitsu Dao used balanced movements and very clever moves to avoid very violent attacks, she knew his martial arts were of an entire different type and were very different from the martial arts found in China. Wei Tianwang used 20 stances already and still couldn't force his opponent to fight back, so he took a deep breath and his fist techniques changed and he attacked slowly now, but the force of his fists increased. Guoxiong felt his energy and stepped out of the pavilion. At this point, Hitsu Dao didn't dare just to avoid these attacks and hung the sword at his belt and stood still and yelled, "You're not the only one skilled in tough martial arts." When Wei's two palms reached him, he used his left hand to respond at this attack. Tough against tough, the three palms made a bamming sound. Wei's body shook and he took 2 paces back. Hitsu Dao stood still. Wei Tianwang always believed that this skill of his was unequaled in the realm. But today he was unable to win and he himself was pushed back 2 paces. He wasn't ready to give up and took a deep breath and yelled out, both palms pushed forward. Hitsu Dao yelled out too and returned a palm, shaking the broken roof. Wei Tianwang backed 4 paces, before he could stand still again. After 2 times of palm-to-palm attacks, his hair was messy and he had bug eyes, now looking very eerie. He put his hands around his public region and took a few breaths, causing his chest to swell up again. All his joints made a funny cracking sound and he walked towards Hitsu Dao. Hitsu Dao didn't dare to be inattentive and readied himself to encounter him. Wei Tianwang kept walking towards he and walked so close that they could feel each other's breath. At this point, one of Wei's palms aimed for his face, the other palm aimed for the lower abdomen. With this attack he hoped to divide the opponent's energy. This stance was very violent and fierce. Hitsu Dao used his both palms to meet up with Wei's palms. He divided his energy into 2 sorts, yin and yang. Wei felt that the palm that aimed for his face was empty and hollow, the other palm felt it hit an iron brick wall. Wei Tianwang knew this wasn't good and he felt an enormous energy coming towards him and pushing him out of the pavilion. This sort of tough attacks, the weaker one will be injured, and there was no way to avoid that. No matter whether Wei Tianwang could stand still or fall down, his own energy was reflected back and Hitsu Dao's energy was added to it. Wei was surely to cough up blood. Pan Tiangang and Fang Tianlao both yelled, "Now!" Both jumped up and grabbed Wei's arms and picked him up, and helped him avoid the enormous blow. Although Wei Tianwang wasn't injured, his 5 internal organs felt like it was turned upside down and all his joints seemed to be cracked. He couldn't breathe easily now and was panting. Fang Tianlao was angry and surprised to see his third martial arts brother wounded, but remained smiling and said, "Your palm techniques are indeed very powerful, and are hardly equaled in the realm. My respects." Guoxiong thought, when it comes to powerful palm techniques, who can match my father's 18 dragon subduing palms? You, the 3 saints of Kunlun, are just too ignorant. One of these days you'll meet a true hero of the Central Plains. When she thought of this, she felt grieved again. because she wished that the hero they would meet was Yang Guo and not her father Guo Jing. Fang Tianlao said, "This unworthy old man wants to try your swordsmanship." He Tsudao said, "Brother Fang was very friendly towards Miss Guo. I don't blame you for anything and we needn't battle." Guo Xiong was surprised and thought, "The reason why you taught Wei Tian Wang a lesson was that he was very rude to me?" Fang Tianlao drew his sword and used a finger to tick the tip of his sword. The sword made a humming sound. When Fang drew his sword, his smile disappeared. The sword pointed into the sky and this stance was called an immortal giving directions. He Tsudao said, "If Brother Fang really wants to battle, I'll use the short sword of Miss Guo." He drew the broken sword. The sword originally was very short and after Wei Tian Wang broke it was even shorter. Furthermore, the tip was gone now and it didn't even resemble a dagger. He Tsudao held the scabbard in his left hand and thrust the sword forward. This was a very fast maneuver. Fang Tianlao saw a white flash and already He Tsudao attacked with 3 stances. Because the sword he used was too short he couldn't wound Fang Tianlao. But Fang was still frightened and thought, very fast 3 stances, most difficult to block. What kind of swordsmanship does he use? If he used an ordinary long sword I would be dead by now. After He Tsudao attacked with 3 stances, he backed away and stood still. Fang Tianlao displayed his sword techniques in half defending and half attacking. He Tsudao avoided the attacks and didn't counter-attack. Suddenly he attacked with incredible speed again, forcing Fang Tianlao to be in a frantic rush. And He Tsudao jumped back again. Fang Tianlao displayed his sword into a white light, and his movements were very swift. Guo Xiong thought, this old man's techniques are violent, fierce, ruthless and viscous. Similar to the palm techniques of Wei Tian Wang, but he's swifter and makes him more lethal. When she thought of here, she heard He Tsudao yell out, "Be careful." After saying careful, his scabbard in his left hand was quick as lightning and encased Fang's sword and his right hand sword pointed at the throat of Fang Tianlao. Fang Tianlao's sword was stuck in the scabbard and couldn't be used to block that stance. Seeing that sword was about to thrust through his throat, he let go of his sword and rolled away on the ground and avoided that lethal blow. Before Fang got up, Pan Tiangang seized the hilt of the sword and pulled it out of the scabbard. Both Guo Xiong and He Tsudao exclaimed, "Excellent movement." This sickly-looking old man didn't say a word, but it was evident his martial arts were above his 2 younger martial arts brothers. He Tsudao said, "Sir, you have very good martial arts. My respects." He Tsudao turned his head to Guo Xiong and said, "Miss Guo, after hearing your enchanting performance earlier, I've composed another song. And I would like you to give me your opinion." Guo Xiong asked, "What kind of song is it?" He Tsudao sat on the ground and started to prepare his zither. Pan Tiangang said, "You've defeated my 2 martial arts brothers. I would like to compete with you." He Tsudao shook his hands and said, "I have already competed and had no pleasure in it. I want to play a song for Miss Guo now. It's a new song. If you're interested you can stay and listen. If you don't understand you're welcome to leave." And started playing the zither. Guo Xiong was amazed and pleased. Somehow He Tsudao composed this new song from the song she played earlier, making it even more brilliant and interesting. The music was very mesmerizing. The actual translation will have to wait for some time, or someone else already knows the translation. He or she is welcome to do that part. At one point of this song, He Tsudao mentioned a she in his lyrics. Guo Xiong thought, the she in his song, could it be me? The music was very touching, moving and was filled with admiration and love. Realizing that, Guo Xiong blushed. Never in her life did she even hear such beautiful music. Pan Tiangang and others didn't understand any of this. They don't know that He Tsudao was a rather arrogant man with a flair of a silly bookworm behavior. After composing a new song he rushed over to play it for Guo Xiong. Furthermore, he composed it for her and he forgot everything else. But seeing him like this, Pan and the others thought he was looking down upon them and couldn't restrain their anger anymore. Pan pointed the sword at He Tsudao's shoulder and yelled, "Stand up, I want to battle you." He Tsudao was entirely into the music and thought himself to be a proud scholar who was roaming about to enjoy the scenery. He vaguely saw a very gentle young girl standing on a small island. No matter what stood in his way he had to reach her. Suddenly he felt a pain in his shoulder and raised his head to see Pan Tiangang pointing a sword against his shoulder and penetrating a bit of skin. He knew that if he didn't fight, Pan would surely wound him. However, He didn't finish his song yet and felt that these Philistines were preventing him from finishing his song to Guoxiang. He Tzu Dao drew the broken sword of Guoxiang in his left hand and blocked Pan Tiangang's attacks and used his right hand to play the zither. He Tzu Dao displayed his special ability, one hand playing the zither and the other hand using a sword. He managed perfectly well with one hand playing the zither. He also used a puff of air to play another chord of the zither. Pan Tiangang attacked rapidly with a few violent techniques. He Tzu Dao easily blocked them and his eyes were concentrated on the zither and was afraid his puff of air will disperse. Pan Tiangang became angrier and angrier, his sword techniques were becoming fiercer and fiercer, but still He Tzu Dao easily warded them off. Guoxiang was listening to the music and didn't pay any attention to the attacks of Pan Tiangang. However, the sounds of the swords intersecting was disturbing the music. She softly clapped her hands and raised her eyebrows and said to Pan Tiangang, "Your techniques are not in unison, are you not familiar with music? If you listen carefully the sounds of the swords won't disrupt the music." Pan Tiangang didn't pay any attention to her and saw that the enemy was sitting on the ground and was concentrated on the zither. And still he wasn't able to overcome He Tzu Dao. Pan became very anxious and his stances changed to rapid attacks and the clatter of the sounds were becoming very dense. This sound was the total opposite of the gentle soft music. He Tzu Dao raised his eyebrows and passed strength to his sword and the sword of Pan Tiangang made clank sound and broke into two halves. However, one of the cords of the zither broke as well. Pan Tiangang looked very pale and didn't say a word and left the pavilion. The three martial arts brothers mounted their horses and quickly rode up the mountain. Guoxiang was a bit surprised to see that and said, "These three men were defeated, how come they're still headed towards the Shaolin Monastery? Do they really want to fight to the end?" She turned to He Tzu Dao and saw him looking sad and was touching that broken cord and looked very unhappy. Guoxiang thought, just a broken cord, why so unhappy? She picked up the zither and removed the broken cord and was tuning the zither again. He Tzu Dao sighed, "After all these years of training, I still cannot focus properly. I used force in my left hand breaking his sword but also breaking that cord." Now Guoxiang understood and knew he was unhappy that his martial arts was still not perfect and smiled, "You want to fight with your left hand and play the zither with your right hand. This form of using your concentration of two matters is only known to 3 persons in the realm. You haven't reached that level yet, why worry so much about it?" He Tzu Dao asked, "Who are these 3 people?" Guoxiang said, "The first one is the old imp Zhou Botong. The second one is my father and the third one is Madame Yang, Xiao Long Nu. Apart from these 3 people, even people with great martial arts like my grandfather the Lord of the Peach Blossom Island, my mother and the Condor hero Yang Guo are unable to that." He Tzu Dao said, "It's hard to believe that there are so many astonishing people in the realm. You must introduce me to them." Guoxiang faintly said, "If you want to meet my father that is not difficult, as for the other 2, I don't even know where to look." She saw He Tzu Dao looking disappointed. She said, "You've defeated the 3 saints of Kunlun, which is an amazing thing. Why fret over such a small incident like a broken cord?" He Tzu Dao was shocked and asked, "The 3 saints of Kunlun? What are you talking about? And how did you know?" Guoxiang smiled, "Those 3 old men came from the western borders, they must be the 3 saints of Kunlun. They do have their unique abilities, but challenging Shaolin is a bit too arrogant." She saw that He Tzu Dao was looking very strangely and asked, "What's so strange?" He Tzu Dao softly said, "The 3 saints of Kunlun, the 3 saints of Kunlun, He Tzu Dao. That's me." Guoxiang was surprised and asked, "You're the 3 saints of Kunlun? Where are the other 2? He Tzu Dao said, "The 3 saints of Kunlun is one person, there were never 3. I have established a small reputation in the western borders, and the local friends say that my chess, sword and zither skills are superb. Also they say I'm fit to be a saint in the zither, a saint of chess and a saint in swordsmanship. But I knew that the saint was not something that could easily be assumed. So I changed my name to He Tzu Dao, not worth mentioning. So when other people hear my name they won't think I'm an arrogant, overbearing man." Guoxiang smiled and clapped her hands, "Now I get it. I thought that the 3 saints of Kunlun were 3 persons. But who are those 3 old men?" He Tzu Dao answered, "They? Those were Shaolin disciples." Guoxiang was even more confused and said, "So they belong to Shaolin?" "Right, their martial arts were firm and strong. Indeed that red-faced man used demo swordsmanship and the sickly-looking man used Wei Tuo demon subduing sword techniques. But there were a lot of changes and alterations to them. I couldn't recognize them. Why did they come here? He Tsudao said, this is not without reason. Last year spring, I was at Mount Kunlun, Peak Jingshen playing the zither. Suddenly I heard fighting noises and took a look and saw two men were struggling on the ground. Both were heavily injured but both were still wrestling with each other. I yelled at them to stop but they still continued and walked over to push them aside. When I did so, one of them fell down and died, the other was still breathing. I took him to my home and gave him some medicines. After half a day he was revived. But he was mortally wounded and no medicine could prolong his life anymore. Before he died he said his name was Yin Zai. Guoxiong called out in surprise and asked, was the other man called Xiao Xiongzi? He was very tall and skinny and his face looked like a corpse, right? He Tsudao was surprised and said, yes, how did you know? Guoxiong said, I saw them once, I never thought they two would fight each other to the death. He Tsudao said, that Yin Zai said he did a life full wicked deeds, there was no use in feeling sorry for himself anymore. He said that he and Xiao Xiongzi went to the Shaolin monastery and stole a manuscript, both of them were suspicious of each other. Both of them didn't trust each other and were afraid if the other one learned the manuscript he would kill the other one and keep the manuscript for himself. Both ate at the same table, slept in the same bed and didn't leave the other out of sight. But, both were afraid that one would put in poison in the food or sneak up on him in the night and kill him. Both were extremely edgy and couldn't eat or rest properly, also, they were afraid that Shaolin monks would catch up on them. So they went to the western borders and at Peak Jingshen, both were extremely weary and knew if this continued both of them would be tired to death. So they fought it out there and then. According to Yin Zai, Xiao Xiongzi's martial arts was better than his and attacked first. Yin Zai suffered a blow, but in the end, Yin Zai gained the advantage. Then Yin realized that Xiao Xiongzi was heavily injured at Mount Hua and hadn't recovered yet. If otherwise, they wouldn't have made it to Mount Kunlun. After Guoxiong heard this story she thought of the situation Yin Zai and Xiao Xiongzi were in and became gloomy and sighed, just because of a manuscript, this isn't worth it. He Tsudao said, after telling this, Yin Zai was having difficulty breathing and begged me to go to the Shaolin monastery and tell a monk called Zhu Yuan something about the manuscript is in the oil, Jing Zai Yu Zhang. I found this sentence very strange and didn't understand what he meant with the manuscript in the oil. Just when I wanted to ask him what he meant, he fainted. I thought after he rested for a while I will ask him again. But he never woke up again. I thought perhaps he hid the manuscript in an oilcloth, but I couldn't find anything in their clothes. Anyway, I have been entrusted to deliver a message so I decided to carry this mission out. Furthermore, I've never been to China before so I decided to tour around for some time and ended up here. Guoxiong asked, why did you leave a note at Shaolin? And challenge the Shaolin monks? He Tsudao smiled and said, this has to do with those three old men earlier. They are the Shaolin disciples of the Western Shaolin Monastery. According to the people there, they belong to the same Tian generation as the Tianming abbot of the Shaolin. It seems that their patriarch had a disagreement with his martial arts brothers here and in a fury he left and founded the Western Shaolin Monastery. Originally, the martial arts of Shaolin came with Master Demo of India to China and from China to the western regions. Which wasn't a strange thing. These three men heard of my reputation as the three saints of Kunlun and wanted to duel with me. On their way here, they kept boasting that Shaolin martial arts were unequaled in the realm. I was permitted to be a saint in chess and the zither but not in swordsmanship. So I had to be the two saints instead of three. And this happened before I met Yin Zai so I thought I could finish two tasks in one go. I sent someone to notify those three old men to meet me at the Shaolin monastery. Anyway, the three of them were traveling very fast and could catch up with me. Guoxiong laughed, I guessed entirely wrong. I wonder what those three old men will say when they reach the Shaolin monastery. He Tsudao said, I don't have any grudges against Shaolin so I left a note that I will come 10 days later. I did this because I wanted those three old men to arrive at Shaolin and battle them. But now the duel is over, let us go to Shaolin together and after I delivered the message we will leave again. Guoxiong frowned her eyebrows and said, the rules of these monks are very strict, women may not enter. He Tsudao said, pooh. What damn rules? We're just going to enter and what are they going to do about it? Kill us? Guoxiong is a rather meddlesome girl, but after meeting Reverend Wu say she has no bad feelings towards Shaolin and shook her head and smiled, I'll wait for you outside, You just enter and deliver the message. There's no need to create unnecessary trouble." Hitsudao nodded and said, "All right. I haven't finished playing my song for you. After delivering the message I'll play it once again for you."